No right that you fought for can ever be assumed to stay with you for the rest of your life. You have to protect the rights that you've won.
If I'm going to die, I want to know what it is like to be free.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cheryl Crooks. I'm Executive Director of CASCADIA International Women's Film Festival. It's my pleasure to welcome you to another live discussion for the festival this evening. It'll be a panel discussion behind the scenes on location with three of our directors, all who have short films in this year's festival. Meryl Williams and Jane Stiles, who directed Dom. Sabina Vajrača, who directed Variables, and Cynthia Silver, who directed The Shallow End and Chemistry. They're going to be talking with our moderator this evening, Stefanie Malone, who is herself Emmy-winning producer and documentary filmmaker, about the difficulties of shooting on location and what it takes to do that. A little bit of a behind-the-scenes look for you. But first, I'd like to thank all of the sponsors from CASCADIA, because without them, it would not be possible. In particular, the City of Bellingham, Crosscut Magazine and KCTS, Whatcom County, the Mary Redmond Foundation, Eileen and Steve Nelson. We could not do without all of our sponsors, for which we're most grateful. And we thank you for purchasing a pass to come to the festival this weekend. All right, now we can begin our discussions, but first, we'll have a look at one of the trailers from the films.
Look at Marjorie Stewart sitting in the chair. Doofus. Major doofus. She's swimming during adult swim break. Go tell the lifeguard.
You go.
You.
Addie, I don't mean to embarrass you, but there's some blood.
Oh my god. I mean, who even wears a one piece?
We should play a trick on her.
Why? Something super embarrassing. If you drop it in water, the water turns yellow.
Kvalificirali smo se za matematičku olimpijadu u Kanadi.
Mi nismo Srbi, mi smo Bosanci.
Gdje pije si ti na jebola?
Excellent. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our filmmakers.
Jane, Meryl, Sabina, and Cynthia, it's lovely to have you all here today. And it was nice to see a couple of the trailers for your films. My name's Stefanie Malone. I'm on the board of Women in Film Seattle. I'm super excited to moderate this panel discussion. And today we're going to dive into filmmaking and locations. I thought as a good way to sort of kick off is to have everybody introduce themselves. Maybe we could start with Jane and Meryl first. Could you guys tell us a little bit about you and the films that you, the film Dom that you directed?
Yeah, totally. Well, the initial script was written by Jane, and yeah, you could maybe speak a little bit about that. Yeah, I wrote the initial script inspired by a feeling, honestly, I had at the time, and growing up in New York City as a character always inspires me. And at the time, I was just thinking about my childhood best friend a lot, and imagining a summer day where we both had nothing to do and could spend it together. And then it was very fictionalized from there. Yeah, and then Jane approached me about helping to direct it due to her acting in the film, and we jumped into working on a little bit of rewrites, just mostly me thinking from directing it for performance and creating some shape. And yeah, and that's how the initial seed was born. And is now turned into a collaboration on other projects as well. So we're really excited for you all to check it out.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. And then Sabina, why don't, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your film. We did see the trailer, but.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Sabina Vajrača. I'm originally from Bosnia, but nowadays I live in Los Angeles. And Variables, my film, I made that as part of my MFA degree at USC. So it's technically my thesis. But I applied and got the grant to make it from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. And so even when I was applying, I applied with sort of rough draft of the script, and then had about a year to develop it with a mentor at school who was in charge of the Sloan films. And the idea to me it's a mix of my own personal story of being a refugee at that age, as well as the true event that actually happened in Bosnia at that time of this group of teenagers who were pulled out of a war zone to go and compete in Math Olympiad in Canada. And I was, one of those kids was an acquaintance of mine. And I was really fascinated by this concept of growing up in a war zone and then being whisked off into a place where no one knows that there's even a war going on back home, and how different that is for a child at that age.
Excellent, thank you. And then last but not least, Cynthia, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and about your film.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Silver. I actually grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I happen to be sheltered in place at the moment. But I've been a New Yorker for the past 25 years. I directed 2 films. One's called Chemistry, which was written by Charlotte Martin, who was a former student of mine at the Atlantic Acting School, where I have been a teacher for over 20 years. And Charlotte came to me with the script after the 2016 election. We were kind of really interested in making films with that felt like they were also maybe mixing our activism along with our art. So that's how that was how that project was born. And And then The Shallow End is a film that I had been wanting to make for almost a decade. I had directed it as it was originally a play, a one-act play, written by Wendy MacLeod, and who had always been a hero of mine. And so I had directed that short, that one act, at the Atlantic Acting School, and then kind of put it away and thought, if I ever get into filmmaking, this I feel like would be an amazing short film. It just spoke to me as a Gen Xer, as a film that, and as a story that I wish I had been exposed to as an adolescent in the 1980s. So, so it was a long journey with that film, but it's my heart project.
Excellent, thank you. So when we talked right before the panel, I had mentioned I just wanted to acknowledge that it's kind of a sad day today. That sort of Seattle's like film gal, Lynn Shelton, passed away yesterday, and unexpectedly, she influenced so many filmmakers, inspired so many young women. She was fiercely creative and a real independent spirit. And I just wanted to ask you all if, I don't know, just if you had any thoughts, or if Lynn ever inspired you in any way, or any of her films. I thought it would be a apropos way to kick off this panel.
Yeah, it's a devastating loss. I just can't even believe we're having this conversation. She was incredibly fierce and such a badass, and influenced me greatly in my decision to become a filmmaker. She definitely had so much influence over, you know, just everything that I knew about her and read about her going into filmmaking, and her fearlessness. And, you know, and I remember reading an article, and I think it was the LA Times piece in 2014, where she just said, you know, don't wait for permission. Don't, you know, she didn't have formal training as a filmmaker. That really inspired me. The fact that she made her first, you know, feature when, you know, she was, quote, further along, was really inspiring to me. So I cannot conceive that we're having this conversation right now. I had just watched her have a conversation with Melissa Silverstein in the Women in Hollywood Girls Club, and that was, I took notes, and that was May 5th, and you know, she was so generous in her information. The amount that she shared with us was just absolute. It was so generous, and it was just so clear that she wanted women to succeed. She wanted other women filmmakers to succeed. She wasn't threatened by other, you know, women filmmakers, and she was the real deal. And it's a really devastating loss.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if I don't want to put you on the spot, but if anybody else wants to chime in before we talk, you're welcome to.
I just want to add that sorry.
No, go
ahead, Sabina. I mean, I just watched Little Fires Everywhere last weekend. I binged it, and then as I was watching it, and I really, really enjoyed it, I looked up who directed, and I was like, of course it's her. Of course it's her, because it just felt so Lynn. And I honestly, when I saw that she died, I'm still in shock. I don't understand what happened. I don't understand how that's possible. And she was so young, and we're in such a time of death. Like, it feels like death is in the air, and people are just dying constantly. And so your brain cannot even process this enormous amount of loss that we're going through collectively as a society. And but that one really, it really hit me because she's just so young and she had so much more ahead of her and so many more movies and stories to tell, and it's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking.
It is. Meryl, Jane, you sounded like.
Yeah, I know it's always a little bit of negotiating the space. But yeah, I think Lynn was someone that honestly recently I've just been seeing a lot of posts by friends posting her photo on Instagram before she passed away as someone that really inspired her. And I just recently started getting very curious about who exactly is this Lynn Shelton character, and she just seems so alive in these posts and so present. And so when you said her name, Lynn Shelton passed away. Do you know Lynn Shelton? It really rung a bell. And I said, I do know who that is. But I really was just about to kind of open up try to figure out exactly what she had done, because we had come to directing as actors, and I think I've come to know her through actors posting about her and being like, oh, this director I worked with is so amazing. She really inspired me. And so we were just talking, we feel really sad because I feel like I literally was just about to kind of start figuring out who this woman was and follow her body of work in this way that she was so vivacious and alive. And so we're just feeling very presently the loss of someone who clearly had such a big impact. But I guess what positive we're trying to take from it is we want to watch her films, and her episodes of television, and we just really want to delve into getting to know. I'm sure we've seen things that she's directed and we didn't even realize it, and so we're going to take this time to really delve into who Lynn Shelton was, and it's really inspiring to hear you both talking about it.
That's great. All right. Well, with that, thank you, ladies, for doing that. It's a nice way to kick off, I think. But we're here today to discuss locations and filmmaking. And so I think I'm going to start with something sort of broad, which is how do you make locations work? And Jane and Meryl, I'd love to kick it off with you two.
I'll kind of let Jane speak a little bit to the herbal store. I mean, the way we found our locations, this is sort of the initial scene in our film, but there's a number of locations, and I think that embody the heart of New York City. And we had a lot of fun finding them. But one of my favorites, I think, is the herbal store that the opening shot from the film happens in.
Yeah. It's fun shooting in our hometown because we get to capture the magic that we live here. And the herbal store is a place that I've gone to for the past 5 years of my life and have a relationship. It's in Chinatown, and I just feel like it's like a ritual of mine. Like I would go there every Sunday for a couple years of my life to get herbs for like different health needs, and I have a relationship with the owners, and it's kind of a hole in the wall place, and they don't even speak English, but it's kind of this communication that we have, and so yeah, it was really awesome to capture that on film. It was really exciting.
Yeah, we hardly had to do any production design for that particular location, and it was just we wanted to bring it up because it's a really beautiful seed, because I think Jane wrote the initial script, she brought it to me. There was multiple locations in it, but we started by going there first and talking to them and saying, would it be okay if we shot here? And that exchange was very behavioral and very loving. And they said yes, and it really helped us kind of get the fire underneath us and feel like we could make the film, and figure the rest out from there, location-wise.
I would just follow up with a question too for you too. I mean, obviously a lot of filmmakers have had New York City. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's almost like a character within the film, right? I mean, such a powerful location. just offhand, are there films as New Yorkers that you really love in terms of locations that have been chosen over the years?
Sure. I watched one yesterday. I'm sure Jane, I mean, it's like trying to figure out on the spot. There's so many, but I happened to watch one yesterday called Little Fugitive. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's from the 1950s. If you haven't, it was one of the most beautiful New York films, and it reminded me a lot of Dom. I actually want to tell Jane about it like today after this call, because it takes place in Coney Island, where the last scene of Dom takes place. And yeah, it's just some of the most beautiful New York footage I've seen. It's all in black and white, and it's absolutely stunning. All about a little kid who wants to go to Coney Island with his brother, and his brother doesn't allow him to go. And then their mother says she has to leave town that day because their grandmother's passed away. And his older brother somehow fakes dead, and the little boy thinks that he's killed his brother accidentally. And it's actually not true. And he goes to Coney Island on his own, just wanting to hold on to this piece of a memory, and spends the whole day in Coney Island. And he's like 7 years old and plays all the games. And it's just so beautiful. If you haven't seen it, I would check it out. It's one of the most, it was so gorgeous. But yeah, there's so many films of New York.
Excellent. Excellent. Sabina, you have such a sense of place in your film. Can you talk about how you made your locations work for you and variables?
Sure. So the film is set in Bosnia during the war, in 1995, and in Toronto. And we didn't have enough money to... Our budget for this was $25,000, which isn't a lot. It's a lot for me, who usually makes movies for like $2,000. But when you were doing a period piece and trying to recreate it in Los Angeles, you stretch it pretty far. So we shot the entire film in LA area. We had to find locations that look like Bosnia in the late 80s, early 90s, and then destroy it in post through VFX for the outside scenes. And that took the longest part, I would say, of our prep. That and trying to find the kids in the film, because, and all of them are non-actors. They're just kids who speak Bosnian that I found in different communities across the United States. But locations is something that I personally am the most proud of. It's, I had 2 producers on this, but neither of them has been to Bosnia before making the film. And so a lot of the decisions on what we're going to go with and even location scouting fell on me. We would do it together, but it was fine. The final word was really about authenticity. Like, can this pass for for Bosnia in the 90s? So that was a big part of it.
Excellent. And then Cynthia, I have not seen Chemistry. I have seen Shallow End. So you could talk about either of them, but you also have a lot of experience. So I'd love to hear just how, in general or specifically to those that you make locations work for you.
Well, I mean, I think it's worth talking about The Shallow End, because it was so location specific. And it was also really, I realized that with, I was having a lot of trouble, or I was having a hard time really wrapping my brain around how logistically we were going to do this film, and how we were even going to budget it, unless we had the location. So that was really, it was kind of like, what comes first, the budget or the location? And fortunate for me, I had worked with a wizard of a production designer and location manager on a previous film, a short film that I did called Sibs. And so I recruited Karen, and, basically she did me a favor and did the location scouting before we had a budget and before we had raised any of the money, because I just really felt like I couldn't even tell people how much this film was going to cost and couldn't really figure out how much I needed to raise until we knew where we were shooting. So that was really, I will always be indebted to Karen Novak for her work on the film. I couldn't have done it without her. So we scouted. She found, I thought it would be like finding a needle in a haystack, and she found about 3 or 4 different potential locations, all on Long Island, of different swim clubs. And this particular location was a community swimming pool, a private club for the community in Roslyn. And she just, I walked on to that location, and it was a done deal for me. It was pink, for God's sakes. It was it was like stepping into a like a time capsule, and it also was it was incredibly nostalgic for me. And so I really went, but the other locations were equally fascinating, interesting, and beautiful to look at. And but it is fascinating that it would have been a different film on the different locations. So it was everything, and it determined the design of the film. It was the keystone component to making that film.
That's great. Cynthia, let's stay on you for a minute. Can you tell us sort of the process in terms of what it takes from, like, you touched on that you had, I'm sorry, was it Karen Novak? Was that your locations manager? Okay.
Yeah.
You touched on Karen as like
designer.
I'm sorry, what was that? I'm sorry.
Sorry. Hello, we're in a, she was also the production designer.
Okay, great,
so,
that's great.
Yeah.
I was going to say, could you talk a little bit about what it takes from scouting to permits? You sort of touched on the scouting thing, but maybe you could talk a little bit about negotiating that location and any permitting in that, for those that aren't as familiar with that.
Yes, I could tell you that I had an incredible producer and locations manager that navigated that whole thing. I have I have a semblance of an idea of how it goes, but Julia Kennelly, who produced the film, she's extraordinary in convincing people to do things for us. So I really couldn't tell you. I know that she had obviously contact and a huge dialogue with the, the person who ran the swimming pool and the club, and then also the town of Roslyn. And, they were all incredibly supportive, and they were excited about a film coming to town. But really, I told you at the beginning, I was like, I can answer half of the questions you want, but really it had to do with having an incredible support team that knew all the logistics of doing that, but also really knowing what was a fair ask, which, I'm still kind of figuring out for myself.
Yeah, excellent. Sabina, did you have a locations manager, or were you leaning on a producer in terms of helping to find and secure your locations?
I have never worked with a locations manager. It's a privilege I have not had yet. But it makes me, locations are really important to me because production design is very important to me. I'm a director to whom that really, really matters, even more than what kind of camera we use. Because if you don't have something beautiful to film, it doesn't matter how you light it. If it's a white wall, it's a white wall. And it's something cinematographer of a friend of mine taught me that. And I'm very grateful for that lesson because I put in a lot of effort on trying to find location. Like it took us about, I would say, 4 months of driving around LA, or anywhere around LA to try find something that could work. And the way it works in Los Angeles, at least, if you have to go through Film LA to get your permits. And anything that is like a public space, like a street or a park or a beach. And also, it turns out that Film LA has a lot of empty houses. A lot of them, so when we went to them to ask for permits for street scenes that we had, we also mentioned that we were looking for something that could stand in for a house in Bosnia, and they said, oh, we have this abandoned house in Los Feliz that you can go and take a look at. And it was just this big abandoned house that didn't even have electricity. And so they walked us through the whole house, and my producer and I imagined, could we turn this room into the kitchen that he has a scene with his mom? And can we turn this room into the classroom that the kids are going to in the beginning of the film? And then we had a totally different location for the waterline in the beginning of the film, but it fell through, which happens, you negotiate all this stuff, it's great, and then dates change, or somebody comes in who offers more money than you do, and you're out of luck. So we lost that location and then sort of scrambled to find something, because that was one of the first scenes we were filming. And then went back to this Film LA house that we're using for 2 other locations and already paid for. And then we just thought, oh, well, maybe let's look in the back of the house. And so in the back of the house was just this yard. And we thought, okay, well, we can use, our imagination and our production designers to build stuff to make, and the crowd and everything to use it for that. So, it's a lot of using your imagination to put in possibilities in places that may not be obvious at first.
Okay, excellent. And then Jane and Meryl, New York City, how do you navigate, you sort of touched on finding your locations, and but how do you navigate permitting? I imagine that can be kind of expensive in New York. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the tricks that you used making this come together?
We really didn't. The thing is that's true. And so I think the answer is kind of like you try to figure out a way to navigate around that when you're in indie filmmaking, you don't have the money for locations. So I think you always want to have a few $100s on hand to be like, hey, we'll throw you this. But for the most part, we tried to find locations where we could avoid having to pay a fee. I think we lucked out having so many exteriors, and did our best to find kind of more low-key, emptier streets in which we wouldn't get hassled. I think you do want to have insurance and certain paperwork on hand so that if you were confronted, you could show that. But luckily, we didn't actually have to pay too many fees. And then one of the interior is actually my own apartment. I would say the downside to that is that sometimes you are turning your own spaces into a location, and having just to sacrifice creature comforts of just it's hard to not have your own space and also your own space be the location while you are doing something like filmmaking. But that being said, I think it's something that we're learning, and on our next projects are going to have to tackle. So I know I've learned a lot from we have a new producer we're working with, Tim, who who knows a ton about locations. And I've always liked to location scout for my own films. I find it really fun. But yeah, there's a ton of brass tacks when it comes to permits and things like that. And I know this isn't giving our wonderful listeners too much information, but I'm still learning about that, and I don't really have much to tell you other than we've kind of done it a bit guerrilla style and relied on friends and people that will allow us to shoot for free. But that's mostly just because we don't have the funds to pay for locations.
That's great. There's a lot of people I think that value your honesty and the fact that you have to do things, you know, on a shoestring budget and in a little bit of a guerrilla fashion. And I mean, it's nice to hear your honesty about that for sure.
I mean, I'd add to that. Before moving to LA, I lived in New York for many years, and my first films were all just me and a bunch of friends running around the city making movies and filming in each other's apartments. And I concur in the, you know, I think in LA it's a little stricter because there's so much, it's basically the whole city is the industry and you cannot really get away with stuff. Someone, you know, you just, the moment you have more than just like you yourself and a camera, you're kind of obvious, you know, so if you have a boom pole and stuff like that. But in New York, I remember we would just go down the street and like just set up, like just kind of in a corner and film. And like the rule was, if it's not on a tripod or if it's not blocking pedestrian traffic, like it's free. Like that's what we decided. So, so I think, you know, you can probably keep getting away with that for a little bit longer.
So did any of you have moments that didn't go as planned, but actually turned out to be better?
No, went all perfectly. No. There's without a hitch. There's always stuff that goes wrong. I mean, you know, it's like the weather, the sun. I mean, it was a huge gamble to, you know, shoot the majority of, with the exception of one interior. Everything was exterior, and you know, it was right after Labor Day, and you know, it's like it could rain at any minute. So yeah, we had a lot of things that would go, and mostly it just had to do with like we were super ambitious on what we wanted to accomplish, and it didn't have as much to do with locations as it did. Like, I mean, I worked with all, you know, children. I worked with children, so we were limited on how long we could shoot. You know, and our AD, Stacy Haid, did an incredible job of like staggering their schedules so that, you know, the crew could continue working, but we'd have to like, you know, let an actor go, you know, so then we'd bring in another kid, we'd layer it in as much as we could, but there's always stuff. And, you know, I think, did it go better? I'm not sure. I mean, but it went. And, you know, you figure it out. I mean, certainly it wasn't like, oh, and like if I look at the storyboards, I was like, oh, right. Oh, yeah, no, we didn't do that. But, you know, the film, you know, you take the footage and the edit and, you know, the film kind of presents itself. You have to, I think the part that I had to learn was letting go once we had finished the shoot, letting go that it was going to be the exact thing that I had envisioned, and just letting the footage tell me what the final product was going to be. So.
Okay, great. Hey, I was going to ask you one follow-up to Cynthia, since you did use a location manager. Is what makes a good location manager or a location scout?
Somebody who is really obvious. I mean, not only understands the script and is inspired by it and interested in telling that story, but also is willing to maybe give up what they envision for the film in the interest of meeting up with the director and, you know, what the director's vision is. And, you know, just that's a huge thing. I mean, Karen is a listener, and also just after a while, I didn't really have to tell her much because she just kind of understood where I was coming from. And that's the same with the director of photography, Janelle Paring. I mean, we just started to just kind of synthesize in such a way that they were filling in the blanks for me very organically. It was magic.
We were supposed to wrap up at 5:45, so I think now is a great opportunity for us to go ahead and to say thank you to our filmmakers. Cynthia, you're amazing. It was great to watch Shallow End. I look forward to seeing you. Hey. Meryl, Jane, I loved hearing about New York City and your very indie ways of pulling that off. Dom was a great film. I'm so glad and lucky that I was able to see it. It's so nice to meet you both. And then Sabina, Variables was just really wonderful, wonderful film. And it was so nice to hear you turn LA into Bosnia. So
I know.
What
incredible.
Right? So what a great talk to all four of you. Thank you all so much for participating. I'm sorry it was a little bumpy there at the end, but I'm glad I get to see your faces one last time.
No. Thank you so much.
No right that you fought for can ever be assumed to stay with you for the rest of your life. You have to protect the rights that you've won.
If I'm going to die, I want to know what it is like to be free.